The Klamath River is one of the most important rivers in America. The Klamath Basin is over 15,000 square miles, which is nearly the size of the state of Maryland. It's one of the West's greatest salmon producers, powering a commercially valuable ocean fishery, as well as a culturally important tribal subsistence fishery. However, the Klamath River is in decline. A century of dams, diversions, and poor land management have led to fishing closures and massive fish kills in recent years. As fish-dependent communities are working to remove dams on the main stem, a new focus is being placed on key tributaries where the overwhelming majority of salmon spawn and rear before their journey to the sea. Of these, the most important is the Scott River. Several migratory fish species call the Scott River home, including steelhead trout, Pacific lamprey, Chinook salmon, and coho or silver salmon, which is listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act.
The Scott River lies right in kind of the transition zone from the volcanic interior to the coastal mountains. The Scott River has a large alluvial valley. So the importance to the Scott River to the Klamath Basin is the habitat that the Scott provides, the unique habitat. You know, the Scott River is kind of the heart of the coho population for the Klamath Basin. Scott River probably has the largest coho population in California. The Scott River probably has the largest coho population south of you know, the Rogue River or south of you know, the Oregon coast.
From a tribal perspective, fish aren't just animals. They're actually a part of us. We have always been and always will be linked to the living things around us, and we see those things as equals. And not just as equals, but as our responsibility as humans is to manage them in the right way. Not management in terms of extraction or resource utilization. We're supposed to manage them in terms of encouraging their health, encouraging their growth, and making sure that they're sustainable.
Well, the Scott River is important to the Klamath River because it's one of the major tributaries that has a flat valley. With that flat valley comes a lot of benefits to fish. It provides all the elements that coho require. Flat channels for spawning, off-channel habitat for rearing, and spring snowmelt for getting smolt downstream.
The coho typically are going to rear in freshwater for 18 months from the time of egg fertilization, and then when they emerge from the gravel in the springtime, they'll be in freshwater for a full year, and they'll leave as 1+ fish, 1-year-old fish in the spring of the following year. So that sets them apart from Chinook, which are leaving at pretty much at age 0, and subjects them to summertime conditions, low flow periods. So they need that over summer cool water rearing habitat that collides with our use of the water, you know, for cities and agriculture. So that's one of the reasons why their numbers are probably down. Those conditions have been altered from historic.
I have followed this ever since they started fighting over water, and the main reason I was fighting is because I wanted to fish. I'm 94 years old. When I come out of high school, and before I come out of high school, if we wanted to go fishing, we never had automobiles. We didn't go 60 miles to go fishing. We went right down here. Patterson Creek and Kidder Creek, and then Crystal Creek and Johnson Creek, the west side of the valley, all drain down into the valley floor. Now all those creeks dried every summer. Very seldom that they ever run. They could run late into the summer, you'd see a little trickle. Now you look at that slough area, and it'll be the first one to dry. It may be dry right now, I don't know, the way the pumping's been going. And it was a fishery. Let's take the slough. The Kidder Creek is a good example because it was just like a snake. Now what you go out there and see right now, the piece I'm talking about is being straightened. What you see now, my friend Game Warden Herb Janney, when they started digging, I asked Herb, I says, what are they doing? They changing the channel? He said, they can't do that. It'd take an act of Congress to do that. But it didn't take long. They did it anyway.
The Scott River coho have suffered the consequences of lower groundwater levels, a simplified channel, lower summer base flows, things like that. So it makes it a tough place to survive during the summertime. But then there's another impact is the adult salmon that are coming up in the fall. Sometimes they have to wait an extra week or 2 weeks or even a month to get into their spawning tributaries. There needs to be a minimum level of base flow in the Scott for salmon to spawn. And if we have a dry fall, those tributaries, let alone, a lot of them don't have water, but a lot of them do not connect to the main stem river. So fish have to come up the main stem river and then get into the tributaries. And if there's not enough water in the tributaries or the tributaries aren't connected to the main stem Scott River, coho or any other fish can't migrate into those tributaries to spawn. The groundwater levels are lower today because of pumping than they were historically. And when I say historic, I'm talking 30 years ago. So not, back in the day before Westerners showed up to the valley. I'm talking just in the last 30 years.
All through high school, I was learning the trade in the creamery part of it. Ended up being a butter maker, ice cream maker. You take the county right here, not only the valley, but the county, a big percentage of everything was raised, was used right here. I think what changed it was the new people that come into this valley. Our big hay baron lives right out here, Finley. His boy wrote this big article. He says, I found a good market for all of my alfalfa. You know what it is? It's horses in Hollywood and down in LA. That's where all his hay goes. It's all goes out of the valley.
So in 1980, the Scott Valley was adjudicated, and so what this did is described exactly how much water different landowners are allowed to take from the river, and for landowners whose wells are close to the river, it affected them. People went out and just put their wells outside the zone of adjudication, so they're not regulated. And in fact, over 172 wells have been drilled outside the zone of adjudication since 1980, and Siskiyou County just keeps giving out well drilling permits. If we're going to get a handle on the problem, we have to appreciate that that's part of the problem. In about 2006, Siskiyou County was required, in order to comply with Clean Water Act, to do its own groundwater study. And one of the frustrations we've had is, years have gone by and the study hasn't been completed. And this is one of the things that prompted the Karuk tribe to go out and do its own analysis. But I can say, the preliminary studies that have been issued by Siskiyou County's folks and the folks at UC Davis they're working with are really consistent with what we're finding, and that's that unregulated groundwater pumping that's not regulated by any adjudication has an effect on stream flows.
Our goal in doing a groundwater study ultimately is to be able to quantify or put numbers to how one activity affects something else. And once we had an understanding of this and we had collected data from, say, 1,000 well logs, and we read all of the literature for the basin and looked at the stream gauges, we were able to then put the information that we had together into a numerical groundwater model. And this is simply a way of collecting all of the information that we have from various sources and putting it in one place where we can then solve groundwater flow equations from location to location within the basin and develop quantitative relationships of how activities in one part of the basin affect other elements. Our study shows that groundwater pumping does affect stream flows, and this is not an unusual finding. We find this in every alluvial basin that we study. Fundamentally, it's a matter of physics. The devil is in the detail, and questions arise such as how fast does it affect the river, and does it make a difference if it's a particular season's pumping or not? So those are some of the complexities that we look at. But yes, groundwater pumping definitely does affect the flow of the stream.
Here's those summer pictures that they kept saying the river was dry. Well, this here is a good example. Now, this right here don't have anything to do with drought. Not one thing. And it was that way several years in a row. When there was a drought year on, but I lived through drought years before that, and we never had this. Just going back to what that article once they wrote in the paper about in the 30s when it was dry, which was written by somebody who don't have any idea. We never had anything like that in the summertime. So these pictures are right back in the 30s, and we never had no dry water. The lowest water I ever seen in drought years, you could still go swimming in it and everything, fished in it. They write these articles, and the people that read it go by that. But the people that really know that stayed here and lived here, they won't say nothing. Speak up.
Well, this is an off-channel pond that was built in the fall of 2009. It was excavated with a large excavator, and the intent was to dig the pond down to capture groundwater and connect the groundwater to the creek over there so fish could volitionally move into the pond. The idea was to provide winter refuge, winter rearing habitat for coho salmon. So all the coho you see in here right now feeding and growing and rearing are doing exactly what we hoped. They're loving this pond, and it's pretty cool to see it. It's the first time I've seen this type of behavior where fish are actually surface feeding in February off of mayflies, so it's really neat. This was our first pond, and it's turned out to be pretty successful. It's really exciting to kind of do something with the philosophy that you build it, they will come. We did a count last week, and our estimate was 1,600 juvenile coho salmon.
The thing that bugs me is the new people that are here in the valley, the ones that I talk to about fishing, the attitude they have, that's what gets me. Because 3 of them said that it was their God-given right to take all the water they wanted. They wouldn't use the word needed. It's wanted. They call it progress, but I call it American greed.
I'm not sure what's going to come first, whether it's going to be the hammer or whether it's going to be, hey, let's try to find a solution together. In the Scott River in particular, the jury's still out on what's going to bring landowners and stakeholders and other interests to the table to talk about solutions. Real solutions, not just modeling and not just all these other things that, hey, let's try this, let's try that. It's really about a water quantity and water quality issue. It's not necessarily about all these habitat things we can do, because if you can build an off-channel pond, that's great, but if there's no water in it, then what's the use of doing it? The Scott River is really a tough one. No solution is going to come easy there, and we're in it for the long haul. We're not going anywhere. We've been here for thousands of years, and we're going to be here for many more thousands of years. My kids are going to benefit, my grandkids are going to benefit from the work that we're doing now.
All I can tell you about the coho salmon is my grandfather, when he took me fishing the first time, steelhead, I was 10 years old, when he talked about the coho salmon in the Indian language, and finally says the ones that the people call silvers. Mm-hmm. But he knew about them, and when he was telling me this, I was 10, 11, 12 years old when I was fishing with him. And then we had coho salmon,